Hello and welcome to tonight's session of the onboarding. I can see that we are still admitting people to our waiting room, and we have the magnificent news that 102 people signed up for this session. So we know that not everybody attends live because this is a recorded session. So a question we always get, yes, you will get a recording of it after the session. But we may be admitting people, so I'll do a slow start. And good evening and hello to you, Kelly. My name is Clarice de Cruz. I'm here, I'm the trainer today from Getting On Board. I'm very ably assisted by Penny Wilson, who's the CEO of Getting On Board. I tend to throw out links and Penny has to find them and drop them into the chat for you. Please feel free to introduce yourselves, your role, and the charity that you're here representing today. As you do that, I'll do a bit of an introduction about the session and about myself. So please do introduce yourselves to each other. This is part of the Trustee learning program. And towards the end, we will explain to you where you can find other sessions from that Trustee learning program, which has got an incredible amount of learning opportunity for trustees in very accessible ways. As I said, my name's Clarice de Cruz, bit of a background. I actually qualified as a lawyer way back when in the early 1990s. I knew I wanted to be a charity lawyer. That discipline, being a charity specialist, didn't really exist. It wasn't heard of. So I went and worked for Interchange Legal Advisory Service, which was part of a registered charity called Interchange Trust. The Legal Advisory Service did what I did for most of my career when I was lawyering, which was supporting charities in my role with governance, constitutional work, but doing this kind of training and providing the kind of board support that Getting On Board provides. And the reason I mention that is in today's training, the first 40 minutes or so of it is about duties and responsibilities. And I've done this training since the mid-90s at Interchange all the way through my career. And I've always had the same feedback, which is when you were talking to us about duties and responsibilities, started getting a bit hot under the collar, started truly appreciating the role I'd taken on. And it did make me feel a bit nervous. So if while we're doing this, you're learning things and thinking, I didn't know that, and it is making you feel a bit nervous, please stay with us until the last 10 to 15 minutes, where I talked about practical tips. Because consistently the feedback over 25 years when I've done this is for people to say to me, actually, when you did the practical tips bit, we realized that our charity was doing most things, because most of what I talk about, although you'll hear the technical aspect of it, is about common sense. Now, I wouldn't be doing my job today, and Getting On Board wouldn't be doing its job if we didn't leave you thinking, oh, there may be some I's to dot, some T's to cross, or there may be another bit of learning that I should look into for myself. So if you feel like that, again, that is very much part of the feedback that we get from these sessions. I should say, in this training, I try and look at it from very practical perspectives. So, for example, I worked at the Charity Commission. You'll hear me talk as an in-house lawyer. That was my Charlie Bucket ticket in terms of a job. And I saw it through the regulator's eyes. So you will hear me talking about the regulatory perspective. I spent 20 years dealing with the good, the bad, and the ugly as a charity lawyer in private practice. And the whole point of these sessions, and what I've been doing for the last 2 years, is actually to upskill people. It's what I call prevention. What I did before was see the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of challenges that charities faced. This is to help share some of what other charities have faced so that you can learn from their lessons and perhaps avoid the hot soup, as I call it. I've also got some board experience, so I'll try and share that with you. In terms of what the session's about, we're going to be talking about who's a charity trustee. We're going to talk about the 6 main duties that underpin good governance. We'll look at the duties under the Charities Act. I also spotlight some other duties that very much dovetail with the governance role, things that charities need to be aware of because they have got it wrong in the past, they've continued to get it wrong. We'll then look at the how to get it right, and I'll signpost you to help, including help from Getting on Board and from the Charity Commission and various other sources. Because this is an hour session, this is a whistle-stop tour. We can't therefore invite you to come off mute, but what we can do is take any questions in the chat box, and that's one of Penny's roles, is she'll monitor that chat box and she'll alert me if there are questions that need to be looked at or answered through the session. So feel free to ask questions. I also really support peer learning. So what we tend to get are aspiring trustees, new trustees, and experienced trustees. So if there's something that you can share, then please do. I would just reiterate, we are recording. We have had situations where people have said things that are a bit too confidential. So if it's that kind of thing, I'd refrain from saying it. Or if it's something you can anonymize, a general tip that you can give, feel free to share. So who are we talking about? What I have put up here is the explanation of who the trustees are that is found in the Charity Commission's guidance. The definition of who trustees are actually comes from the charities legislation, and this is the layperson's explanation, basically, of what the technically worded legislation says. The trustees are the people who have overall control of the charity. They're responsible for doing what it was set up to do. The buck stops with them. The key thing to note is determining who a charity trustee is relates to the role, not the title, because charity trustees are given different titles, and that's largely to do with the sector you may be working in, the structure of your charity, and the terminology that some charities or some subsectors use. I mentioned my board experience. At one point, I was a school governor of a charitable independent school that was set up as a company limited by guarantee. That made me a school governor, a charity trustee, and a director. 3 titles, 1 role, 1 person, three very much overlapping roles. Usually I just was referred to as a school governor. If you are a charity of a CIO or a charitable trust, you might just be called a charity trustee. So there are different titles, but it's the role that decides who the charity trustees are. So I mentioned those general duties. I always explain this by reference to the Charity Commission's jigsaw, which you can find on the Charity Commission's web page. The Charity Commission's website has got a huge amount of really useful information. And this is the jigsaw that explains the main duties. I like this jigsaw because it explains that the duties overlap, because they do. And on the back of the jigsaw, when you find it on the Charity Commission's website, they go into a bit more detail than these jigsaw pieces, which is what we're going to go on to look at. I always start with the bottom left-hand piece, which is the duty to carry out the charitable purposes for public benefit. This means understanding your charity's purposes. This means understanding the activities the charity is undertaking to deliver its charitable purposes. And this means making the 2 of them, ensuring the 2 of them stay aligned. What sometimes happens with charities is that their purposes, and this is because of charity law, may be expressed in quite technical, sometimes quite dry terms. So they might develop a mission statement or a vision. And the mistake I've seen charities make is that becomes their sole purpose. They don't look back, their sole focus. They don't look back at the charity's actual purposes, which are set out in the governing document. And these things become uncoupled. And then the activities grow and grow and grow and grow by reference to the mission and vision. At some point, someone looks back at the purposes and thinks, oh dear, we've strayed well beyond what we were set up to do. That's called mission drift. So the way that you deal with this is to keep everything aligned, be able to explain, think about how your activities further your purposes. And that second bit of this duty, how they deliver impact. What is the public benefit? That's what public benefit's all about. So you're carrying out activities, how do they fulfill or further the purposes, and then how do they deliver public benefit, i.e. deliver impact? The way as trustees you keep on top of this is to ensure that you carry out your strategic role in planning what your charity will do. Keep your purposes and your activities under review. And if you do have a vision and a mission statement, make sure all those things and your strategy is aligned. That's your role as a charity trustee, that strategic oversight. Next piece of the jigsaw I want to talk about is the yellow piece, which is complying with your governing document and the law. Already we can see that this piece of the jigsaw overlaps with the previous piece, because I mentioned your charity purposes. How do you know what they are? You look at your governing document. Again, depending on what your charity is, your governing document, it may be a articles of association, it may be a constitution. If you're a charitable trust, it may be a trust deed or deeds. It may involve a charity commission scheme. So how do you know what your governing document is? You should be given that on your induction, and if you're not, you should ask for it. A little tip in terms of how you can provide some oversight. If you're a registered charity, the Charity Commission's website will include details of what your governing document is. So when you're given your governing document, you can jump on their website and think, yeah, that's what that says. And if it doesn't say that, you've got to ask yourself, is it that you've got something that's out of date, or is it that the Charity Commission's website needs to be updated? And that's something you can then prompt. If you're a company limited by guarantee, you'll also find it on Companies House. So that's how you can find it. But actually, if you're being given a good induction, as every trustee is entitled to expect, you will be given your governing document and some other key information and document when you start. Hopefully, if you're given a good induction, you won't be inundated with things on day one. These will be given to you over a period of time, basically. I'll come back to inductions a bit later. Second bit of this jigsaw is, sorry, before I go on to that, your governing document, if it's fit for purpose, and if it's been reviewed recently, updated recently, or if you're quite a new charity, it should be fit for purpose. But a good governing document that's fit for purpose acts like a rule book. So if you have a question about constitutional issues, that's your first port of call. You go and say, what does our governing document say about this? And you would follow your governing document. If, when you ask around, either people aren't up to speed about the governing document, and that happens, or it feels to you that maybe it hasn't been looked at for a while, the thing to then do is to do a review of your governing document and check it's still fit for purpose. Check it's still that good rule book. There are different models out there, depending on your type of charity and things like that, and they can be quite a good guide. The Charity Commission has models, but just bear in mind with the Charity Commission, they have that regulatory role, and therefore they do put in things that you might not find in other governing documents, because as regulator, they want the kitchen sink in there, basically. Just be aware of that. Other bit of the jigsaw is to comply with the law. You are not expected to be an expert. I will come back and I will repeat this. You are not expected to know all of the law. You are, however, expected to know where you might need to look, and if it's a momentous decision you're making, or if it's a significant risk-taking decision that you're taking, you may need to think about taking advice if you can't find the answer yourselves. There is a lot of guidance on the Charity Commission's website and on various other websites that give you the basics around the law. So often you can find the advice, or sorry, the support you're looking for, the clarification in that kind of guidance. But if you can't, that's when you start thinking, have we reached a point that maybe we need to take an advice from someone who's an expert in that area? I say this joyfully and gleefully because now I don't do that kind of work at the moment. And in the first 20-something years, when I did this talk, I could almost see people's eyes rolling, thinking, well, she would say that. The only reason she's doing this is because she wants us to then come to her or her firm when needing advice. I'm not doing this. So when I tell you to take advice, I've always said this, it genuinely is areas that you need to be careful about. Next piece of the jigsaw, the green piece, act in your charity's best interest. This has a number of components. It involves making balanced and informed decisions. And what that means is staying up to speed. So some basics. When you get your papers, please, please, please make sure you read your papers. What I do for the boards that I sit on, and I'm not holier than thou, I'm not always able to do it the way I'm about to describe to you, but what I aim to do when I first get my papers, and a good, well-run board should be sending out papers a week in advance of the meeting. That doesn't always happen. But when I get them, I literally skim them, and I skim the agenda, and I think to myself, are there any issues that are so significant here that I might need to think about it before being asked to make a decision? And I'll come back to this later in this jigsaw. Are there any issues where there may be a conflict of interest that I need to declare, which I'll come back to? If it's a pretty straightforward meeting, and I don't think that there's anything really significant, and you will know as a trustee because well-run boards will work up to big decisions, basically. You shouldn't be doorstepped with a big decision. But if you are just doing pretty standard and straightforward business, what I then do is the night before the meeting, or if it's a meeting later in the day, the morning of, I'll really try and digest the papers. I'll go back to them and do more than just a skim read. If it includes a really significant decision, that's where I might read that bit of it, so I can then give myself time to reflect and think about either questions I might need to ask at the meeting, or how I might be deciding to inputting on a decision, whether I'm going to be saying, yes, I support this, or can we do it a different way, or have we thought X, Y, Z? Next bit of acting in the best interests of the charity is to question, challenge, and debate. I do, in my current role, a lot of board support, board observation type work. And the boards I'm most concerned about are those where you see agenda item 1, this is what's come to decision. You see a bit of body language, and then you move on to agenda item 2, as if it's passed, basically, without any discussion, without any debate, without any question and challenge. Good boards will question, challenge, and debate, but there are rules of engagement about how you do it. I also work with boards where they have got board dynamic issues, or even quite strong boards who want to further strengthen themselves. And what I would say is a strong board is able to have quite a robust discussion, but they do it in what I describe as the right way. It is issue focused. It is never person focused. So you're focusing on the issues and you're discussing between yourself the issues. What I would say is you want to be able and to encourage people to express viewpoints, even when they may be differing viewpoints. At the end of that discussion, when you need to come to a decision, it's the majority decision that then needs to be supported. So once a decision has been made, as long as it's within, the law says, the range of decisions a reasonable body could make, then it cannot and should not be challenged. That notion, the range of decisions a reasonable body could make, makes it clear that in many situations, there's no one right or wrong decision. There are different avenues you can go down, and you're trying to find the one that, with all the facts in front of you, seems the most appropriate one at that point in time. Okay? So if you'd expressed a viewpoint and it was a minority viewpoint, once that majority decision is taken, if it is within that range of reasonable decisions, your job is then to support it and make it a success. What I have seen go wrong with boards, and one that I was working with quite recently, in fact, I'm coming back to work with, was where they won't let go. And actually, in one situation, it became a personal issue rather than the personalities became to the forefront rather than the issue. And we had to do a lot of work around this. Well, I know it wasn't that viewpoint, but are you saying it wasn't a reasonable viewpoint? And the decision that was made, and they agreed it was, well, then you need to move forward. You can't be always trying to undo a decision. You know, that is not good board behavior. I mentioned conflicts of interest, and that's something I look at when the agenda comes up. This is an area that disproportionately features in the Charity Commission's regulatory work. And we know that because you can read the regulatory reports, and time and again, a conflict of interest is part and parcel of the governance problems. The duty is to be able to identify, manage, and record conflicts of interest. And people are getting better, I would say, at identifying financial conflicts of interest. They're still not so good at identifying what I describe as conflicts of loyalty. The easiest example of a conflict of loyalty is somebody who is a trustee of two organizations, and they are both looking to apply for funding, major funding from the same source. That is a conflict of loyalty. And people don't recognize that. Eva's asked a question, can trustees serve on multiple boards? Wouldn't that be a conflict? Yes, trustees can, and they can serve on multiple boards in the same, working in the same areas. The point about conflicts is to be able to manage them. So it's not to avoid them entirely. It's pretty difficult to avoid conflicts arising completely, entirely. You might have people who are, this is another example of a conflict, a CEO of one organization and a trustee of another. And that is incredibly useful to the sector. To have people with those two perspectives is incredibly useful. What though, in that situation, if you need to think to yourself, in whatever I'm looking at, is there something where the interests of the organizations I'm involved in clash? At which point you need to declare it. And then a decision needs to be taken about how to manage that conflict of interest, which might be avoiding it entirely, going down a different route, or it might be neutralizing it. So asking that trustee not to be involved or only to give information, not to then step out. And this is something that boards find really, really uncomfortable. I think it's our culture, asking someone to step out of a meeting. So the best thing to do is to just simply be aware of it yourself and say, well, at this point, I should step out, basically. The other thing you must do is record, because I have seen a situation where I know, well, a colleague had said to me, I attend this trustee the meetings these trustees held. They are really good at conflicts of interest. And they just did not write that X had stepped out the room. And then for whatever reason, it came before the Charity Commission. And we ended up having to write a letter, and you can imagine the costs involved, but you know, we had to write a letter saying, look, their custom and practice is this. It isn't in their minutes, but actually we can attest to the custom and practice. And then the commission became a little bit more flexible about the situation. So do remember also to record. A very particular area to be careful about is trustee benefits. So let me just explain. Trustees are allowed to claim expenses. By that, I mean reasonable expenses. But unless there is some form of authority, it's an absolute rule of charity law that trustees must not benefit without authority to do so. Authority might come from the Constitution, it might come from the Charity Commission, but unless there's some form of authority a trustee should not be benefiting. And again, this is an area people trip up. There is a lot of guidance on the Charity Commission's website. We're not able to go into all of the different areas on this, but there's a lot of guidance on the Charity Commission's website around trustee benefit. And I will be coming to some bite-size guidance towards the end of this talk that I refer to. And that's probably where to dip your toe in, just to make sure you're up to speed on all of this. So, next piece of the jigsaw, manage your charity's resources responsibly. Again, you can see from that top bullet, this relates back to your yellow piece and also your brown piece of the jigsaw. Ensure the assets are applied for the charity's purposes and no other purpose, including no other charitable purpose. Remember, I talked to you about mission drift in the brown piece of the jigsaw? The way you do this is to be on top of what the purposes are in your constitution, your yellow piece. The other thing that I would mention to you is the most valuable asset that a charity has is its good name and its logo, its reputation. We've seen from the high-profile cases that have hit the sector press that when a charity gets things wrong, it can really seriously, significantly affect its reputation. And actually, it can affect your charity's bottom line financially. So one of the major household charities, in the month after the safeguarding scandal broke about the work it was doing, reported that over 700 donors, regular donors, had stopped donating. And then there was a domino effect with bigger funders and donors pulling out. So when you're making your decisions, I sometimes say, if it's a decision that you think, well, this might be controversial, apply the harshest critic test and weave that into your decision making, so that if you do decide to go ahead, you can explain your decision. You can then deal with any controversial kickback you may get from it. The other piece of this jigsaw, which is a real challenge for all charities at the moment, is to ensure a charity is and will remain solvent. That's not an absolute duty. You will have all heard, I'm sure, about the Kids Company case. In the end, Kids Company had to be wound up. What people don't understand about that case is when it went to court, it was looking at it through the eyes of the director disqualification process and proceedings. It became evident that it was actually the trustees that brought the winding up petition, and they were not just exonerated, but by the judge. I know the Charity Commission came back and had it second bite, but by the judge, they were exonerated, and she made it clear that she thought that they had acted very as they should have done and carried out their duties as trustees as they should have done. Controversially, the Commission then came back and took another view, looking at it through a different lens. But the point that I was making is that there might come a point where you think this entity can't go on, and you need to then think, can the mission go on in some way, a merger or transferring the activities elsewhere? And if not, how do we ensure the orderly winding up of these operations? This is a real worry for a lot of charities that have been navigating very choppy waters, probably now for 4 years, I'd say, plus. Other bits of the purple piece of the jigsaw: avoid unduly risky activities. I've really purposefully put in unduly. I was lucky enough to share a platform with the then head of policy at the Charity Commission. And one of the things she said when we were looking at risk and risk management, which I'll come back to, was simply taking no risk is in itself a risk. The risk being that you are putting a glass ceiling on the impact that your charity makes. So this bit is about well-managed risk, properly managing risk. And I'll come back in the practical tips to risk management and what you can do. Other elements of this: protect your charity's assets. Remember that name and logo point that I've already touched on. The other thing that I think all charities need to be really aware of at the moment is we are in an environment where I think it was something like 56% of charities in a particular survey, it was quite a small survey sample, reported that they thought the risk of charity fraud looking forward for a year had increased. In difficult times, when you look at risk and how charity fraud turns from risk into an incident, one of the elements that's prevalent is motive. And one of the motives is often a person's own financial pressure, the pressure that they are under. There is a great website, Prevent Charity Fraud. Oh, there, Penny, I don't know if you can find that. Prevent Charity Fraud. Got lots of tools on there about simple steps you can take. What I will say about charity fraud is when I have dealt with it, yes, there's the financial angle, and for some charities, it is devastating. I can tell you the most devastating thing is the absolute destruction of trust and the relationships within the charity when a charity is hit by fraud. So having those controls in place, actually, it protects everybody. And we've just popped in, Penny's just popped in the link to that website. Maximize your charity's assets. If you are one of those fortunate few charities that have truly free reserves that you may not need to call upon, think about where you might be able to put that until you need it, in order to be able to generate some income to support future work. If you're investing it for any period of time, you need to think about the fact that you're not going to be able to access it immediately. And depending on the nature of the investment, and definitely when you're borrowing, if your charity is borrowing, you really need, that's an area you need to take advice on, basically. And depending on what you're doing, it might very well be an area you need some external advice. The fifth piece of the jigsaw is the duty to act with reasonable care and skill. At the heart of it is acting prudently as a charity trustee. And there are two elements to this. There's an objective standard. It is not enough, and I have sat on a board where I've heard people say we're just volunteers. And it's a precursor to we turn up to meetings. It is not enough to say you are a volunteer. There is a minimum standard, and the test is the reasonably competent trustee. So not you as an individual, the reasonably competent trustee. If you have a particular skill, if you're an accountant in relation to financial matters, I would say, if you're an investment expert in relation to any investments your charity makes, if you're a lawyer in relation to legal matters, there is a higher level of skill and care expected. But if you don't have that higher level of skill, if you don't have a particular skill, you're not expected to be an expert. Essentially, what I'm saying is, for lay trustees, it's that reasonably competent trustee standard. You're not expected to be an expert, but where you are an expert in something, there's a higher level of skill and care. So I've got a question here. Trustees need to have relevant skills, and as you can hear, a lot of these skills will be collated over time. Understand the diversity, but one should not be appointed purely on age to tick box. Can I confirm this? I can absolutely confirm this. You are always looking for the confluence, that's a term that Penny gave me, the confluence of diversity and skill. What I have heard people say is we have to lower the standards. No, you don't have to lower the standards. You need to look for diversity and skill. And if you look, if you recruit in the right ways, you will be able to find that confluence if you're also looking for diversity. The reason you should never appoint for diversity only, because if that's the approach, diversity hiring fails, because even if someone has the skill, if that's all they've been appointed for, almost inevitably, the board dynamics are such that it does not end successfully, basically. That's what we have seen. So when you're appointing for diversity and skill, and when you bring that diversity on, you need to take steps as a board yourself to get ready for the different ways in which people might challenge. Yes, you're right. It's about reflecting and representing people too. So one of the things, particularly for younger people, I've heard all sorts of things said about younger people where I've had to say, do you know, they probably think of that about us age 50 plus in relation to digital and other skills. So I was a governor on a school board. One of the most impactful trustees we had was somebody who had been at that school, who had come from a background with the most incredible lived experience, who was 20 something. I had been to school 20 years before, and I was one of the young trustees. So you need to think about what your charity is doing and how diversity is going to help you engage with your audience, how it's going to help you understand what they need. And so that is a skill in itself, if I'm really honest. But when you have got good board dynamics, you will draw out other people, other skills that people on the board have. I'm straying into a completely different topic here. And Penny, have you put in the, yes, there's loads of links in our trustee learning program, all about how you do this properly and get it right, basically. And what I will say is diverse and inclusive organizations outperform those that don't. And all the research is out there. So go to one of our other sessions and we will be able to show you how to deal with that particular conundrum. It is right that you always do need to look at the skills you've got and make sure you cover the skills though, which is, I think, the point that you're also making. There is a duty to act personally. That means you have to turn up to meetings, you have to be engaged, you have to be involved. And I've talked about acting by collectively and by majority and then supporting that majority decision. Where you have got staff, you can delegate, and even where you don't have staff, you might delegate to co-trustees. When you're delegating, remember that first slide I talked about, that role description, you are still responsible, so you still have to exercise oversight. When things are hard, when the going gets tough, and we've seen this through the pandemic, you need to roll up your sleeves and be there more for your charity. That's the reality. So, last piece of the jigsaw, ensure accountability. Really important to comply with your legal, accounting and reporting obligations. And I'm going to come back to that. There's not a one size fits all. There is charity guidance that will help you understand what your charity needs. The 31st of January is a very common charity deadline, filing deadline. Check whether what your charity deadline is, and there are steps that you can take that will help your charity meet its deadline. I've actually done a blog about this, and meeting your deadline actually starts months before with the preparation work that goes into ensuring that you've got the accounts done in time, etc., and signed off. So feel free to look and get some free tips there. This is a compliance thing, but it's also an incredible opportunity to talk about the impact of your charity's work. So don't just see it through the eyes of the compliance. See it as, when I'm doing my annual report, how can I sing about what we do? And how can the charity sing about what it does? And how can it, when a funder or a donor looks, make someone think this is the kind of charity that we need to support? And that accountability goes up and down through an organization. I call it like a golden thread. There are certain things around governance that are a golden thread that need to filter through the organization. So last bit of the duties, eligibility to act. You need to check you're eligible to act. And this is one of the things I say, Penny, could you drop in the link to the eligibility form? Within that form is another link that will really help you go through all of the bits. Very, very rare that someone's ineligible to act. Sadly, I came across it many times when I was a charity lawyer, but in the context of the number of trustees that there are, it is a very, very small proportion. There is a duty to register. If you're a CIO, you must be on the Charity Commission's register and remain on it. For most other common form charities, the duty to register kicks in if the income's more than 5,000. There are some very niche areas where charities are exempt or accepted from registration, but for most, it's £5,000. And then there's this ongoing duty to supply information, including the accounts, the annual report, etc., to the Charity Commission. If you ever get under the Charity Commission spotlight, that's where as a trustee, you've got to really prick your ears up and make sure that everything that goes to the Charity Commission is accurate. And if something has gone to the Charity Commission and needs clarification, that needs to happen because it's actually a criminal offence to provide false or misleading information. I've mentioned accounts and reports in that blue bit of the jigsaw. In 2013, the Charity Commission started a class inquiry into double defaulting charities. These are charities that fail to file on time 2 years in 5. That doesn't mean 2 years in a row. It means over a 5-year period, year 1 and year 5, year 2 and year 3, you can do the permutations, they fail to file on time. If you fail to file when the documents you need to file on time, you will go red. It will say at the top of your charity page that the whole world can see, including funders and donors and stakeholders, overdue or filed late. And then it will actually tell you the number of days that it was filed late. So that blog will help your charity work backwards. And one of the simple things you can do as a charity trustee is go and look at your charity central web register page. I'd say every charity trustee should do this. That's what the rest of the world can see about you. So you should know what the central register set page says about your charity. And you can breathe a huge sigh of relief if you see that, oh, there's no red there. If there is an occurrence of red, that's where you've got to be doubly on top of it to make sure it doesn't happen again, so you don't potentially fall into that inquiry. In terms of charity documentation, there's certain information that you need to provide. And again, it depends on your structure of your charity, etc. You can Google it and find out and look at other people's websites to see the information that they provide. It's things like the registered number. It's the status. Is it a company limited by guarantee? If it's a company limited by guarantee, there's all the company law requirements around your registered office, etc., etc. Similar regime for CIOs. So just ensure that charity documentation has the information that it needs. What I say about this is when you look at the legislation and the law, it specifies certain documents this information needs to go on. Where I've seen people go wrong is to try and do it according to how the law was set up. Just put that standard wording. It's not much on all your documentation, then you can't go wrong. Charity land is something I've seen people really, really trip up on. You do need legal advice. Right. In terms of Charities Act duties, there are duties around fundraising, both in the charity legislation, particularly around commercial participator arrangements where the charity is working with a commercial entity, and professional fundraising. But there is fundraising law and good practice. The best place to go for that is the fundraising regulators website. If Penny, you can drop that in. It's got really, the fundraising code of practice is really user friendly. Eva, I will come to charity indemnities in the tips on how to get it right. So why do trustees trip up over charity land commonly? Because it's so complex. It's what I would say is even a property lawyer I've seen make a mistake that triggered a stamp duty land tax of £160,000 because they weren't a charity property lawyer. The legislation, they are trying to make it more flexible, but it's just an area that if you've got land and you're dealing with it, buying, selling, mortgaging, that kind of thing, granting rights over it, you need a charity property lawyer. And public benefit, we've talked about a lot, showing your impact, reporting on your impact. in your annual accounts, you've also got to make a statement that says you've had regard to the Charity Commission's guidance on public benefit. I don't know how you have regard to it without reading it, and I will show you a quick way in to find out about that. These are some of the duties just to be aware of. Safeguarding and protecting people. When I first was involved in the sector in the mid-90s, when people talked about safeguarding, their minds automatically turned to, well, is this a charity that supports people with a disability, or is this a charity that works with children or vulnerable adults, the aged, etc.? This duty applies to all charities, and it's above and beyond safeguarding. It's about protecting people. And it's expanded because of the scandals we've seen, because of some of the very poor culture. I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, the Charity Commission worked with the sector, and there was a sort of working party that looked at bullying and harassment in the charity sector. And they came out and said, as if it needed saying, there is no room for that kind of behaviour in the charity sector. So this is about looking after everybody. A lot of guidance there, and there's a 5-minute guide as well that I will point you to. Data protection, 2018, the whole world changed for charities when the general data protection regulations came in. Charities are still playing catch up on that. The place to go is the Information Commissioner's website. And there's a lot of guidance there. If you're a charity that runs events or has staff, you need to think about health and safety. If you're a charity that has staff, you need to think about employment issues and employment law. And something that is a duty, but some might argue through the back door, where your charity has a serious or significant adverse event that may affect its reputation, its assets, the people that it works with, or where it risks that, you may need to report that to the Charity Commission. Again, there's a lot of guidance around this. And what I would say is, actually, the Charity Commission, only less than 1% of charities were reported as filing serious incident reports. We know because of the nature of what charities do, the nature of who they're working with, and the very difficult circumstances that some charities are working within, that things are going to go wrong. It's how you handle it that you will be judged by. Part of that will be looking at, could it have been prevented and how can it be prevented again? But actually, you won't simply be judged by the fact that something's gone wrong. You will be judged as much by, did you handle that situation well? So practical tips. So I think, yeah, Kelly's made the point that, you know, the sector needs to work harder in relation to stopping bullying and harassment. So there was something about indemnities, which I will come to very shortly. First steps, you should get induction training. That could take up to 18 months for those of you that are aspiring trustees or new trustees. Even if you're an experienced trustee, it will take you 18 months to get to understand the organizational dynamics and get to know your charity. So you should, as part of that, have training, and there should be ongoing training opportunities, which I'll come back to. In terms of charities and trustees and personal liability, if your charity is incorporated, the most common forms are a CIO or a company limited by guarantee. You are insulated to a large extent, not entirely, but you're insulated from liability, because as a CIO or company limited by guarantee, the charity has a legal existence in its own right. You are also entitled to an indemnity. So if you are a charity trustee of an unincorporated charity, unfortunately, there is no legal entity. So if something goes wrong, people will come against those involved, and it will ultimately be the trustees. So the first thing you can do if you're an unincorporated charity is incorporate. That's one level of protection. But you should be entitled to an indemnity. As long as you've acted properly, your indemnity will allow you to look back to the charity and say, well, if this is going to fall on me personally, I'm entitled to indemnify myself out of the assets of the charity. So that's how the indemnity works. You should also be looking at trustee indemnity insurance, which I will come back to at the bottom of this slide here. We've talked about delegation and oversight. I think it's always important to look at your delegation arrangements and think, are they still fit for purpose? With delegation and the oversight bit, it really relies on good reporting back. So good delegating down, good framework, and good reporting back so people stay informed. I mentioned risk management and the fact it's not about avoiding all risk. The thing I talk about now, and there's somebody called Sabrina Siegel who really is very, very good at this. She does a whole load of podcasts, all free, that you can listen to. She talks about objective-centered risk management. And that is, you look at what you're trying to achieve. You then look at all the things that might present challenges or create risks. Then around that, you look at what you can do to overcome those challenges, eliminate the risks, or if you can't completely eliminate, minimize, you then make the decision, do we go ahead? That's objective-centered risk management. In relation to insurance, you need to make sure the charity is insured for what it's doing, and there is guidance out there to help you, but also that the trustees have trustee indemnity insurance. Those are the two aspects. So I can see there's a lot. I'll come back if we've got time about the skills and diversity. Penny's just dropped in the link to the podcasts that you can look at about risk management. Other things you can do, regular governance reviews, and touching on what we've seen in the chat, do look at skills matrices. Look, you need to look realistically at the skills your charity needs in order to have a board that can help it be well run. And you need to then build in succession planning in order to be able to manage when somebody with those skills leaves or where you've got a skills gap. The other thing that I work a lot with boards on is what I call board audits, which is actually looking more at the culture on the board and how you can work together to improve that culture. My mantra is that boards should be looking to co-create decision-making, acting collectively. You do need to deal with dynamics and have a good dynamic in order to be able to do that. And that's where a board culture audit can help. We've touched on diversity and inclusion. Penny, feel free to come off and tell me if that has been fully dealt with, because I haven't read, I can see there's a stream here, or not. Is it, do you think that's been, yeah. We do have other specific sessions on this. So if this is a challenge, and it's a challenge for a lot of organizations, I'd wholeheartedly recommend that you tap into one of those. And I've talked about where you need to think about seeking advice. I'll come back to the Charity Commission support and getting on board, where getting on board can help. In really momentous decisions, and these are really big cases, probably involving significant sums of money, charity trustees have sometimes had to go to court to get the court support for things. Also, if you get it wrong, as long as you have acted honestly, you have been discharged your duties, you have been involved, you've done everything that you should, there are protections in there. So for trustee benefits, there is this notion of an equitable allowance where a trustee ought to be allowed to keep a benefit. The Charity Commission start from the position that you shouldn't, so you have to make that case out quite well. Similarly, I've worked with charity trustees who've got it wrong, but they've tried their best. They were involved. It was an honest mistake, and they have not found themselves personally liable, because now certainly there's enshrined in the legislation the power for the Charity Commission to actually relieve from liability, provide relief from liability, and the court as well. Previously, what we used to do is go to the charity, or usually the Charity Commission will have come to the trustee, and we'd have made out the case, and they'd have said, we're not going to take this any further. Yes, Penny, board diversity is never fully dealt with. I think that's probably the takeaway from tonight. Okay. Where you can look to for support. Getting on Board has a lot of support through the Trustee Learning Programme and through the Charity Board Leadership Programme, and through the Transform Programme. So please take a look at what's available out there. The Trustee Learning Programme is entirely free, thanks to our very kind sponsors. For this, it's Russell Cook. For the finance strand, I think it's Rathbones. And for the trustee recruitment board, diversity, those kind of issues, I think it's a great collaboration between a number of recruitment partners. Yeah, so, you know, our sincere thanks go to them. If you're going to go away and read one thing, you know, and take that on board, please read CC3, The Essential Trustee, What You Need to Know, What You Need to Do. That will then signpost you. You're not expected to keep all of this in your head, but once you've read that, when something comes up, you'll think there was something about this in CC3, and then that will signpost you to the more detailed guidance that you might need for that situation and that particular issue. Penny, could you put that link in? I think that might be the link to CC3. Some particular ways of getting on board can help. How to diversify your charity board. So that whole thing that we've been talking about, there's a free guide there, care of Shaparency, and I think it was a range of partners that worked on that to support that publication. How to recruit trustees for your charity, which we've talked about. There's a guide there, care of our good friends Rathbones, and how to become a charity trustee, which I would say put it on your website, put a link to this on your website so that prospective trustees know that you are committed to investing in their journey, and they can look at it and they can come to you with a little bit of, okay, I understand this role and I understand how I'm going to go about getting a role like this. You can also sign up to the Getting On Board newsletter. These are the things that Getting On Board help with. The learning program, there's a load of free guides and resources. Festival of Trusteeship, probably already starting to plan for next November because it's the biggest gathering of trustees. And there's huge peer-to-peer learning, is what I would say. It's one of the joys of doing this particular session and the work we do. I've mentioned that newsletter. So this has been part of the Trustee Learning Programme. It is sponsored now, but we also do find that there are people that come to us and say, that was really, really useful. And they are kind enough to want to pay it forward. So if you do, there's a link there. If you do and if you can afford it, there is a link there. So are there any other questions, Penny, that I missed?
Yeah, there's a couple, Clarice. Emily says, do we all need trustee indemnity insurance? And also, can you explain a bit more about charity insurance in general, please?
Okay, so there is charity insurance that you will need for your charity, and that is specific to what your charity does. So you will probably, there's a general guide. I don't know if you'll be able to find that, charity and insurance. Well, there certainly used to be on the Charity Commission's website, but it goes through the whole remit of insurance that you might need. If you're unsure about this, there are insurers that work with charities and will be able to advise you on the areas that you need to be insured. But if your charity is insured, it means that when something goes wrong, that should kick in. You need also trustee indemnity insurance. And there was a time people said you didn't, but the kids' company trustees would not have been able to afford the litigation. I think we've got 2 minutes left. Put it into the chat what you think that litigation costs. They would not have been able to defend themselves without the benefit of trustee indemnity insurance. So I now think that charity trustee indemnity insurance, it's not just a comfort. It is there for if and when you might need it. And usually, if you're taking insurance out for your charity, the add-on for trustee indemnity insurance is really not that much. So it's, you look at it in the round. The other thing that was that all that there was for the questions?
There's one other, Clarice. Would you like it?
Yeah.
So Richard says, is there any guidance on board audits?
If you mean the culture, there's a lot of guidance. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Getting On Board has some guidance around the kind of skills, the general skills charities might have. Reach Volunteering also has that, I think. So that's your skills. In terms of a board audit, I work very closely one-on-one with boards because you need to find out what the issues are with the board, but you're asking some pretty straightforward questions that will help tease out how confident and comfortable people are contributing and what the barriers might need to be in a summary. There isn't yet a template, I don't think. And even with all the ones I've done, I've not quite got to a point where I've thought, well, this is the reason I don't put it out there. If your board is not in a good place and you use it, it can be quite explosive, basically. So you sort of almost need a bit of steering, and sometimes some boards need someone external so that they can filter not in a bad way, in a very good way. They can filter the information to get to the issues rather than some of the personality dynamics that come out in these situations. So not that I'm aware of from the board audit bit. The other thing I would say is, for those of you who are aspiring trustees, we had, and I will be putting it out there on LinkedIn, the loveliest feedback from a delegate who has said she's very happy for me to share this. After the session in October, she said, I'm in an interview process, and thank you to all of the team. I found that really useful. It's solidified my decision to go ahead, but it's also helped me with my interview and feeling confident going into it. And then we got an even better email, a text message from her to say she'd got the position. And one of the things that the interviewers had particularly picked up on is how impressed they were with her, that she had taken the time to do this particular learning. So if you're applying for a trusteeship position, please sing about what you have done to upskill yourself, because it shows your commitment. They should rightly have been impressed that she'd done it. The other thing we do ask you is, we had 102 people today. Please, if you found this useful, signpost it to other trustees. We do sometimes get very experienced trustees, and I have had people, not in this, in commission training, one-to-one board training. Somebody said, who'd been a trustee 20 years, I just wish I'd had that kind of training when I started. So if you found it useful, please, when we put it out there on LinkedIn, like it, share it, post it, and all of the trustee learning program. It's a free resource, and it's there to help you. If not, I think it's time to say good night. So yeah, okay. And my last goodbye, my parting thing is, thank you for taking the time to upskill yourself. I hope it gives you the confidence to carry out your role with even greater impact.